Bring the lights down low, it's time to show. Lights, camera, you know what we mean. Behold the magic of the silver screen. Some movies rock, some movies shock. They're powerful, alright. We cover them all on your favorite part. So many movies we can choose. Even when you win, you lose. Life moves pretty fast. Some will fizzle and some movies last. I understood there would be no math. It's the 30-something movie podcast. Be excellent to each other. Peace out and word to your mother. They're from the best decades. Movie magic that never fades. Lightsabers clash, phasers set to stun. Action packed from dusk till dawn. We have deep thoughts and questions free. Come share our love of the movies we see. Life moves pretty fast. Some will fizzle and some movies last. I understood there would be no math. It's the 30-something movie podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the 30-something movie podcast. I am one of your hosts, John Reed. With me, as always, my partners in crime, actually my other beat reporters tonight, Bo Warmbold. Bo, how are you doing?
I am well, John. How are you on this lovely evening?
Excellent. You working on some stories?
Always
Okay.
Always
All
telling my stories.
All right. We'll see what you got later. I might have to edit a few things, but we'll see what you got. Patrick,
I would
you look like you're
recommend
hot
editing.
well, Patrick is hot on the trail of a story here. So, Patrick, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Super excited to talk about this movie and welcome a guest.
Yes. Speaking of, we have Rob Perry back with us again, one of our Patreon co-executive producers. Normally with us for horror movies, but I think this one holds a special place in your heart. So,
just a tad. Yes. Hello, everybody. Yes. For 20 years, I was a journalist at a biweekly newspaper, and was when I saw this movie, I was in college, so I thought that's kind of what working in a newsroom would be like. There are some parallels, but nothing like what this movie portrays.
mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, I saw this one. I was in college, so it was a few years after it came out. And I was there for journalism. I kind of fell in love with journalism when I was in high school and got to work on the school newspaper. Didn't do that until my senior year because for some reason I thought, wow, if I'm going to work on the high school newspaper, I need to take a journalism class first. So I took our journalism elective class that we had when I was a junior. And then I kind of got into the newspaper and realized, no, I totally could have done this without taking the journalistic writing class. I would have been totally fine.
Yeah.
But at the time, our high school newspaper was like winning all of the national awards. We were like top high school newspaper in the country. We kept going to the student journalism conferences, and we kept winning all this stuff. And so I was kind of intimidated. I thought, well, I need to really get myself ready. And then I kind of was like, wow, man, I wish I had done this for more years because I only got to do it my senior year and absolutely loved it. So that's when I ended up going to college for it. And that was the plan. And I saw this movie when I was in college, and I thought, yep, this is exactly what I want to do. Like, I want to be in a noisy, hectic newsroom. I want to be running down, trying to, get the story and pulling stuff at the last minute. And like this appeals to me. And then I don't know what it was. I think it just, at some point I made the switch and I was like, yeah, but I remember my dad working a lot, and I don't know that I want to be working at like all kinds of crazy hours. And I maybe want to, have not that I resent my dad doing that, but I was like, maybe I want to do something a little different with my family and not be traveling all the time or working all the time. So for some reason I decided to switch to teaching. So I was just grading stuff all the time as opposed to traveling. But no, I won't bury the lead here. I fell in love with this movie the first time I saw it. And this was kind of when I was in journalism mode, this was my Dead Poets Society, for when I ended up switching over to teaching. Like, that was my other movie that had kind of inspired me. I was like, every class I have is going to be just like Dead Poets Society. Not so much, but
No?
that's right. No, not every one of them. 20% of one of the classes I taught, I think, was maybe a little Dead Poet Society, but kids stood on the tables. I know that much. So,
Oh yes, and jumped out of windows, of course.
yes. No, nobody would ever do that.
No.
Don't tell my secrets, Bo. So if you haven't figured it out already, this episode is on The Paper from 1994. Very, very quickly, we spoil freely here. So as we are mentioning movies, if you hear a title and you want us to just skip past it just a little bit, give us like 10, 20 seconds, skip ahead a couple of times, and you should be good to go. If you haven't already, visit our website, 30podcast.com. You can leave a rating, a voicemail, and then you can join us over on Patreon as well, where we have a bunch of bonus content over there. So bunch of really, really good stuff. 50, I think over 50 plus episodes over there as well. So go ahead and check that out. And we've been adding a few other people over there. So exciting to have that. And thankful for all the support that we get from there. Rob being one of the people that supports us. So thank you so much for that, Rob, and for everybody else that supports us over there. I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into the stats for this one. This one came out on March 18th, 1994, rated R, with a runtime of 1 hour and 52 minutes. Directed by Ron Howard, who did A Beautiful Mind and Apollo 13. David Koepp and Stephen Koepp were the writers. David did Jurassic Park and Spider-Man. Stephen Koepp did National Geographic Presents and Hometown. Producers were Brian Grazer and Michael Hausman. Grazer did 8 Mile and Frost Nixon. Hausman did Gangs of New York and Amadeus. Composer was Randy Newman, who did Toy Story and Monsters, Inc. Cinematographer was John Seal, who did Mad Max Fury Road and The English Patient. Editor was Daniel P. Hanley and Mike Hill. Hanley did Rush and The Da Vinci Code. Hill did Cinderella Man and Backdraft. Production company was Universal Pictures on a budget of $20 million. This one made $48.4 million. Flickmetrics gives it a 67%. CinemaScore gives it a B+. Michael Keaton played Henry Hackett. He was in Batman and Birdman. Glenn Close was Alicia Clark. She was in Fatal Attraction and Dangerous Liaisons. Robert Duvall was Bernie White. He was in Apocalypse Now and The Godfather. Marissa Tomei was Martha Hackett. She was in My Cousin Vinny and The Wrestler. Randy Quaid was Michael McDougal. He was in National Lampoon's Vacation and Independence Day. Jason Robards, who passed in 2000, was Graham Keeley. He was in Once Upon a Time in the West and Magnolia. Catherine O'Hara was Susan. She was in Beetlejuice and Home Alone. Spalding Gray, who passed in 2004, was Paul Bladden. He was in Swimming to Cambodia and The Stories. Lynn Thigpen, who died in 2003, was Janet. She was in The Warriors and Lean on Me. Clint Howard was Ray the Dispatcher. He was in Apollo 13 and Solo, a Star Wars Story. Jack McGee was Phil. He was in The Fighter and Crash. And Siobhan Fallon Hogan was Sandra. He was in Forrest Gump and Men in Black. So a couple of trivia things real quick. Oh, yeah.
I want to ask one quick question. And this it seems like a lot of the actors and other individuals that you mentioned worked on a lot of Ron Howard films. Did that list stay? Okay. I mean, because it was like you were going down the list and then it all seemed like Ron Howard film, and then all these actors and actresses worked on Ron Howard. And the other thing that struck me on the list is just how many like diverse films, what a diverse array of films that Ron Howard has made, right? Because I mean, you got this, and then he did Solo, right? Didn't he do Solo?
Yep.
And then he did Rush, which I'm guessing that's the Formula One Rush movie. Yeah, I'm just going to take a second that it's just like Ron Howard just makes good movies about any topics, and they are always really good movies. That's just my perspective. My little 2 cents I'm throwing in, hearing the list.
Yeah. And kind of before this one, some of his movies before this were, he did what he did. He did Far and Away, was Parenthood. When was Parenthood? Parenthood was a few years before this.
Parenthood was 89, and then he did Backdraft.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, just I have a hard time, especially in this era of Ron Howard, I have a hard time finding a movie of his I don't enjoy.
The Mission. Excuse me, The Missing.
Oh, I was going to say The Mission. I was like, oh, I think I like The Mission, but let me see if I can remember it.
I misspoke.
I don't know that I've seen The Missing. Oh, I have seen The Missing.
It's rather forgettable.
Yeah, it was a bit of a miss. But yeah, no, I mean, in this era, well, that's true. But yeah, in this era, you've got Willow, you've got Parenthood, Backdraft, Far and Away, The Paper. His next one after The Paper is Apollo 13. I enjoyed the movie Ransom, which is the next one he
Yep.
does after Apollo
Ransom
13.
is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, this
Well,
is he's hitting home runs pretty much this entire
Yeah.
stretch of the late 80s to early 90s.
And it is common, I guess, that, like certain directors will have certain actors that always are in their films, and
Mhm.
I'm sure certain other personnel. But the thing that's not the oddity. The oddity is just that list is such like an eclectic mix of topics for movies.
Yeah.
And it all comes back. And I think I remember when we were talking about Solo, a Star Wars story,
Mhm.
just saying like and just kind of not being, kind of being the operative word, it's just a good movie. And now I'm sure the Star Wars fans are all going to start writing in and telling me about, because there's only two good Star Wars movies, Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, blah, 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 blah. But my point is just from a movie perspective, he just on a core level makes good movies. I mean, I'm sure there's some, like you mentioned, there's some that maybe don't live up to that thing, but wow. Yeah. Ron Howard is a fan.
Yeah. Yeah. And a couple things, I think, trivia wise, one of the interesting things about this movie, and probably the reason this movie got made, is I think it was Ron Howard and Brian Grazer I believe they were the owners of Imagine Entertainment at the time. And while, when the paper comes out, they had a series of movies, I believe, through Imagine Entertainment that did not exactly hit the mark, box office wise. And they were kind of looking, my understanding is they were kind of looking at maybe restructuring a bit, like, no, let's pull back a bit and let's maybe do a smaller story. Let's do something that's not a necessarily big budget, something that is just, I want to do something simple, I think was kind of Ron Howard's take on it. And that is when he met the Kep brothers. And they sounds like they were kind of talking, and he's like, hey, what are you working on right now? And they're like, oh, I'd love to do a story about a newsroom, and just like what happens in the course of the day in the life of a newsroom, and just the hecticness of it, and just the search for the truth, and just journalistic integrity, and that kind of stuff. But it's just a simple story about a newsroom. And my understanding is Ron Howard was like, that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm looking for. And so they were, wanting to make a bit of a shift, and they were looking for a story. And it sounds like through Kep, they ended up finding their story. And that is one of the reasons this movie ended up getting made. But I believe Kep was also a former journalist as well. I want to say he worked for Time magazine, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I
So
don't remember who he worked for off the top of my head, but he was a journalist, yes.
Yeah. So he had some experience with that. So is obviously bringing some realism to that. One of the things, and I think Rob, you ended up saying something similar to this, but one of the things that was in the trivia tidbits in here was that a lot of people praise it for its realism of what a newsroom looks like. Now, granted, that's probably a newsroom in a city. The only newsrooms I ever got to experience firsthand were my high school newspaper, my college newspaper, and I think I shadowed for a few days somebody at the county newspaper. And I don't ever remember those being quite as hectic and stressful as what we end up seeing in the movie. So, but I'm sure had I been in a New York City newsroom, it probably might have looked a little bit more like this. But the only other one of us that has, journalism and newspaper experience is Rob. So Rob, were you ever in a situation where your newsroom looked even a fraction like this?
The first election that we covered.
Okay.
And the reason it was so hectic is that we had to go and get printouts of the voting totals from all 22 precincts.
Okay.
So people who weren't even on the news staff were going, we had to be at the polls when they closed at 7. Then we had to wait to the printouts, get in our cards, and bring them all back to the office. So it was like a whole bunch of people, lined up, one person sitting there at the computer, updating, numbers, just had a big Excel spreadsheet, sitting down there just typing in all the results, and then making sure that it was adding everything up so that we had all of the as accurate as they could possibly be results from each of the precincts, so that when we published, and we did delay our deadline like happens in this movie. Okay. And the publisher did kind of tell us, it's like, it has to be on the press at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And the press guys were all paid overtime. All the delivery drivers, were waiting, and it was a costly thing, and that's why we only did it during the elections. But there would have been no time, any other time, where we would have quote unquote stopped the presses or changed the paper mid publishing. That would never happen.
Yeah,
not where I was.
Yeah. A couple other trivia things for this one, and then and then Rob, if you've got a few, feel free to throw those in there. I know a couple of them were that Alicia Clark's, Glenn Close's character, originally was supposed to be a man, and they ended up swapping it because she just, she was, it's Glenn Close. So when you got Glenn Close, you swap the character out, but they did say they didn't really change too much about her character. I believe her character's original name was supposed to be Alan, so they changed it to Alicia. But otherwise, dialogue, the situations she was in, except for maybe the affair that she was having, really none of that necessarily had to get changed, because they just figured, nope, if you're going to be a woman and you're in this situation, you're in this position, in this newspaper in New York City, there's probably not going to be too much difference between a man and a woman in this position. They're both going to be tough. They're both going to be, they're both going to kind of deal with the same struggles and whatnot. So they really didn't have to change the character too much from that. The other thing I've got here, and then Rob, I'll kick it over to you if you've got any other trivia on this one, is that apparently the fight between Michael Keaton and Glenn Close actually did get kind of physical. And I believe Michael Keaton was even heard to comment at one point that he was a little concerned with how tough Glenn Close was. This was maybe almost a little too realistic, and she's one tough lady. So, and I guess she had to kind of like tone it down a little bit because it was getting kind of intense. So, all right, I think that's about what I got for trivia. Rob, did you have anything else on this one?
I honestly do not, but I mean, he should have been aware of Glenn Close's toughness if he ever saw Fatal Attraction. So
I was just gonna say, like, I wouldn't mess with Glenn Close.
Do you not? Yeah, I'm like, do you have a pet bunny? Do you? Yeah. All right. All right, we'll do a quick synopsis. We will play the trailer audio for you, and then we'll jump into major moments where we break it down into 10 major moments for you to kind of summarize the movie, and then we'll dive into our deeper thoughts on this one. In the heart of New York City, Henry Hackett is a fast-talking newspaper editor battling deadlines and drama. As the pressure mounts, his colleagues, including his very pregnant wife, get caught in a whirlwind of ambition, loyalty, journalistic ethics. In a single day, lives will change, stories will break, and decisions must be made, all before the presses roll.
%99% of your time and effort goes into three basic things: your house, your work, your family.
Henry, you know those days that can change your whole life? This is one of them for us. For good or bad, it can happen either way today. So, don't blow it.
And all three of them pulling you at once in different directions.
Every day, I'm behind from the minute I get up. I walk, talk, and think as fast as I can just to keep my head above water. Wait a minute! It's not even, it'll be too... Look, listen to me. Ow!
If you put them all together, three of them want more than you gotta give.
I'm on my way out at 8:25, and I just happened to notice that our presses aren't running. It strikes me as rather odd, since we are, after all, a newspaper.
Gotta go. First of all, you look fabulous.
Your family, I mean, they're people, and so you figure you can get a little human leeway there. I mean, you figure they'll bend.
You listen, Henry!
listen.
You don't see!
Of course I see. See what?
So, what do you do about that?
What is that, a gun?
I told you, Sandusky's after me.
When did you get so paranoid?
When they started plotting against me.
You want to run the story? You got 5 hours until 8 o'clock. Go get the story.
Boy, what if these aren't the guys? What if they're innocent?
We chain them today, we make them look good on Saturday. Everybody's happy.
I saw the investor list.
You are so good. Do you know how good you are at this? You drive me crazy when you're like this. Or what are you wearing?
It's wrong.
Not for today, it's not. Tomorrow it's wrong. We only have to be right for a day.
People will read this, Alicia, and they'll believe us. Don't just take a position because it's the opposite of what she says. It's like watching a bunch of sixth graders.
This is so good. I'm running this tonight.
Tomorrow is fine. Tomorrow.
No. Today.
Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Tomorrow.
Don't take the bat out of my hand. It's the ninth inning. You know what this is like. I gotta get the quote. The guy's not gonna be there all night. I gotta get it.
We run what we got. What the hell is going on?
Are you nuts?
God, I miss this place.
All right, our 10 major moments for this one. We start off the story. Henry Hackett loves being the Metro editor of the New York Sun, but he's a bit weary of the long hours and low pay, and he's got a baby on the way. So he's worried that he'll become a bit like his editor-in-chief, Bernie, who has basically sacrificed his family for his career. And with this brand new baby on the way, Henry wants something a little different. So he does have, he has an interview with a much better, I don't even want to call them necessarily a rival newspaper, because I don't think they would consider themselves a rival to the Sun. And we're talking about the Sentinel, which I believe is supposed to be a stand-in for the New York Times. And it's pretty telling when he goes to his interview at the other paper, just how different these two locations are. You know, in the newspaper he's at, they're struggling for money. Everything is hectic. Desks are piled up with file folders and papers. The air conditioning doesn't work. The Coke machine is out of Coke. All this, and it's just a crazy, frantic, chaotic place. And then he goes to the Sentinel, and everything is clean, and everything seems to be fairly orderly, and everything is relatively quiet for a newspaper newsroom. You know, I think everybody maybe dressed a little bit nicer or neater. Nobody's sleeping on a couch, as Randy Quaid is wont to do in this movie. So he gets there, and that's kind of his chance. He's got the interview, and he basically is told he's got the job if he wants it. Bernie reveals to Henry that he has prostate cancer and is kind of trying to reconnect with his estranged daughter before it gets to be too late. So this adds a little bit of weight to kind of his concern about work-life balance, because he's seeing another example of family strife there. The managing editor, Alicia Clark, Henry's rival, imposes some cost-cutting measures due to the paper's financial struggles. She makes a comment at one point about the newspaper about to fold just about every 6 months or so. And this is going to create some tension between them, as she is starting to prioritize the newspaper's bottom line over quality journalism. Henry's very pregnant wife, I believe 8.5 months, she says, Martha, urges him to take a job at the Sentinel, which would have better pay, give him more time to be with the family. And she's worried that if he stays put at the Sun, that he won't be able to be involved in their child's life. The story we start off with is 2 African-American teenagers are arrested for the murder of 2 white businessmen in Brooklyn. They are gunned down in their cars. Henry and a columnist, Michael McDougal, become a little suspicious of the case after they find out that on the, I believe it was on the police scanner, somebody comments that this is all a setup, that these guys did not do it. They are not the real culprits. And that's kind of what kicks off their search for the story, because otherwise they're gonna go with the headline of "Gotcha" and blame these kids for it. And Glenn Close's character basically says, "Look, hey, if we're wrong, whatever, we'll do what we're going to do now, and then tomorrow we'll print another story that makes them look better." And that doesn't really fly with Henry. So Henry basically becomes obsessed over proving the teenager's innocence. He sabotages his chances of landing the Sentinel job by stealing information from the editor's desk during his interview. Martha has a source that reveals the murdered businessmen were actually involved in a mob-related embezzlement and lost a bunch of money for the mob, which kind of deepens Henry's belief that the teenagers were falsely accused, and they're going to push his team to uncover the real story. I think at that point was Marissa Tomei's character Martha suggested that they have a headline of something like "Dumb Fellas," which is a bit of a play on Goodfellas that My Cousin Vinny co-star was in. Henry kind of he's trying to demand more time to confirm the truth, change the front page, get a photo of the kids at the perp walk. Alicia refuses to extend the deadline, worried about the cost of the overtime. They have this heated confrontation, ending in a basically a fist fight, and Alicia ends up firing Henry. He has that great moment of being able to say, "Stop the presses," which, like Rob said, nobody ever says "stop the presses." It's not like it's happening on a daily basis. But every TV show and movie you see, somebody is at some point always trying to stop the presses. Alicia kind of reconsiders after she goes for a drink with McDougal. Reconsiders, but McDougal has been carrying a gun around with him for most of the movie because he's been writing some stories about the parking authority. And Sandusky is the guy's name, actually played by Jason Alexander. And Sandusky has been sitting in the same bar that they've come to, sitting there drinking pretty much all afternoon, and ends up noticing that McDougal is in the same bar, recognizes his name at least, and then they start to fight. As they're fighting and kind of kicking each other down on the ground, the gun comes loose. Sandusky ends up grabbing the gun, taking the gun, and he ends up firing it, but firing it in a way is probably just to scare McDougal, not to actually shoot him. And that is the point at which Alicia has gone to the phone she's had a change of heart. She's tried to go to the phone, make the call to make a change, and she actually gets shot through the wall. And that is, I love that point where she's shot through the wall and she's just sitting there. She's like, the bullet came out of the wall. Why did the bullet come out of the wall? No, you just can't quite figure out what's going on here. Which, back it up even further, there was a moment, and again, this has never happened in the newsroom I've ever been in, earlier in the movie where everybody's arguing, and McDougal decides to get everybody's attention by stacking up a pile of newspapers and firing a gun into it, which
is
again,
a choice.
It's a choice, and I never worked an actual professional job at a newspaper other than student newspapers, but I can pretty much guarantee that never would fly in any workplace. You'd be fired at that point.
The cops would have been called.
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't that is that the scene where he's trying to let let the man talk to his wife, or let her talk to the husband? Okay.
Yeah.
Let them talk. Let them talk. I said, let them talk. So we get to the point that even from her hospital bed, Alicia is insisting like she will not sign the release to have the bullet removed from her until she is able to get a phone, and she herself can then stop the presses and run the correct story. Henry ends up having to rush to the hospital for the birth of his son because his wife went into kind of premature labor, or she was she was not well, and so something was wrong with the baby. They had to call the ambulance, so he has to rush there. And then the next day, the New York Sun runs the headline, "They didn't do it." Henry is now a father and kind of reflects on the day's events as the youths are released. Since Marissa Tomei is in here, I feel like I should call them the Utes. The Utes are released thanks to the paper's exclusive scoop. And we have gone one full 24-hour period because I believe we start the movie at 7 a.m. on the first day, and we end the movie at around 7 a.m. the next day. So it's a full 24-hour period of the day in the life of the newspaper. So that should pretty much be it story-wise.
Rob, when we were talking earlier and I said about that we were talking about the scene where he pulled the gun in the newsroom, I think I cut across you. Were you about to tell a story of something, I don't know, similar? Oh, okay.
No.
Because you kind of got me all excited because I think you were saying something like, well, that never happened. That the police would have been called and all that. And then I thought I heard you say the one thing that happened that was close. You had my, I was all excited. There was going to be some lurid story, but
no. Nothing like that ever happened that I'm aware of.
Right.
He has no recollection of that, Senator.
But the one day that Rob was out sick, who knows?
Yep.
All bets are off.
Yeah, not to get too serious, but I don't know if you guys heard about. It was back in 2018 or 19. I was still at the paper, and some disgruntled guy who had been written about went into an Annapolis newspaper room and shot some people, shot 7 journalists. So that was one of those moment of clarity moments that you have, that you realize that your job really. And so this scene in the bar with McDougal and Sandusky kind of made that creep up in the back of my mind, because there are people who, and some people just don't quite understand when you work for the government. You're a public servant, you answer to the people, and sometimes, in a newspaper setting, planning and zoning guys who have never talked to journalists, and people that are not used to dealing with the press suddenly have to deal with the press, and some of them get it and others do not. Unfortunately, in the case of the guy who shot up the Annapolis newsroom, he was somebody who had shown up in a newspaper on the police blotter a few times for various things. So it was a little bit of a different situation than a parking director guy getting upset about somebody being critical of his job and how he was doing his job. So
yeah.
Not to bring the mood down when we're talking about a comedy.
Oh,
but
no. Well, that and the closest story I have to anything like that, and again, I only ever worked for student newspapers, but I do remember there was a time where somebody called our newsroom, and I ended up being the one that answered the phone. And it was a guy who was, let's see, this was at the University of Illinois, probably would have been maybe late 99, early 2000. He was a disgruntled employee of, I want to say I don't think it was the veterinarian sciences department, but one of the departments that either dealt with agriculture or veterinary science, and which it's Illinois, so that's probably half the school. He was very disgruntled, and he had a folder of files that he had made copies of, and he was convinced that they were hiding a bunch of money somewhere, and that they were cheating their employees out of raises because they were embezzling money, and just all kinds of stuff. And so I remember he called, and I happened to be the person to answer the phone in the newsroom. And he basically said, well, he said, I've got a gun and I'm on my cell phone. I'm standing in the lobby of I don't know if it was the vet med building or agricultural building or whatever it was. And he's like, I'm going to stand in here and I'm going to hold this gun. And I want somebody to listen to my story. He's like, I want somebody to tell my story. I have files. I have actually sent a copy of my files to your newsroom. I don't know if you've got them yet or not. And and like, I'm a 19-year-old, 18-year-old at that point. And I'm like holding the phone and trying to cover it up and tell my editor, I was like, guy has a gun. What do I do? And they're just like, yeah, just, you know what? We'll call the police and the campus police. Just keep him on the phone. Just keep talking to him and don't say anything to rile him up. Just ask him questions. Just ask him, be interested in his story and ask questions and just keep him talking until somebody can get there. And so I ended up just talking to him and asking him questions and keeping him on the phone, try to keep him calm until the police got there and they were able to get in and get him and took him away. And, somebody else ended up covering the story after that. I didn't get assigned that story, but that was kind of a hectic start for an 18-year-old to be like, okay, is this going to be what it's like? Like, am I always going to be talking down people on the phone who have guns and are possibly building hostage? Or, because sure, I could do this, I guess. But I think that was kind of one of the moments that I had a little moment of stress. And I was like, maybe I want to be on the sports beat. Maybe that's, although, with athletes, sometimes it's not always better.
It's the parents you have to worry about there.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that is true. So I think I took the slightly less adventurous route and enjoyed working on the campus town beat, where I got to kind of interview people on the redevelopment of the campus town and kind of what they were doing to revitalize things. And anytime there was a entertainer that came in and held a concert, and Sir Mix-a-Lot was one of my favorites. That was fun. I even got to choose the headline for that one. So it was something like Sir Mix-a-Lot got back to Champaign-Urbana.
Oh, there
Yeah.
you go.
I was super proud of that one.
Worthy of the sun, I might say.
Yes, yeah, I think so. Yeah. So and with that, it's a wonder I never ended up completing my journalistic career. Um so yeah, I mean just yeah. Just some crazy stories, but no, I vaguely remember a story about that shooting. I was looking it up real quick. It was the Capitol Gazette shooting.
That is
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, I remember vaguely hearing about that, and yeah. Yeah. I Before we dive into kind of our deeper thoughts on this one, I was going to ask you, Rob, because you obviously of those of us that are here have worked in journalism and have worked for a newspaper. Um, how have things changed? Because I think about this movie and I think, well, this takes place in '94, and I think that's kind of just on the cusp of the decline of the hard copy paper newspapers. We're going to start getting, as you get into the early 2000s, it's really starting to switch to digital, and then things really kind of seem to go downhill from there. So when did you start? What year did you start working at the paper?
I graduated from college in 1999 and started 2 weeks after I graduated at my hometown paper.
Okay.
And started there as a cops and courts reporter. Moved. I was talking about earlier. I moved up rather quickly into editor positions, but I was able. But even during that, I was jumped back and forth between beats. Then we got bought the first time by an arm of the Washington Post company that was the Gazette's, and they bought us. And I was taken out of my editor position and put on their regional desk where I was covering schools for Prince George's County in Maryland, which probably was one of the most crazy times of my career because the school board at that time was so dysfunctional. It was fighting with its superintendent that they had brought, paid this woman a lot of money to come and help fix their school system. And then members of the Board of Education just decided they didn't like her and just tried to make her life miserable. Calling newspapers, calling, I actually had to go and meet one of the members of the Board of Education at Union Station for lunch. So I had to go into DC, clandestine, meet him for lunch for him to give me a whole bunch of information about what was going on
This is
behind
like
the scenes.
deep throat stuff, man.
It absolutely was. It wound up. I wrote quite a few stories, and as soon as an editor position opened up closer to home, they were like, "It's yours." And I went and stayed in Southern Maryland and became editor of my own paper. And it was during this time that I became editor of the flagship of our division that another company came in and decided to buy us away from the Washington Post company. That was after Bezos decided to come in and buy the Washington Post and decided he didn't want anything but the Washington Post itself. So the Washington Post had to sell off all of its other properties. And this company came in and decided to very, very quickly whittle the paper down to next to nothing. It doesn't even resemble what I started at 20 years prior. And it is now that I no longer work. I was eventually shown the door, just like everybody else. Anybody who was a squeaky wheel or was making too much money, or if there was any pushback, and I was somebody who would push back and not fall in line a lot to a lot of the things they were doing, and eventually I was asked to leave and take it because they were taking the paper in a different direction. And it's happening all over the country, especially with community newspapers. Every newspaper in the country has been affected by the dawn of the internet, and people. I don't want to talk mean about people in general, but people can't sit down anymore and read a 400, 500 word article. They get their information in snippets. I mean, the whole TLDR thing all the time. Every time I see too long, didn't read, I just want to just lose it because there's so much disinformation out there. And I think the thing about newspapers is that our mantra was to get it right the first time, not be the first to get it. And that is something that is kind of lost a lot with, especially in community newspapers. That's the big thing that's suffering the most, because nobody is writing about, people's kids. Nobody's writing about individual accomplishments that are happening in your community, people who are doing good things. And the biggest thing that is lost with community newspapers going away is keeping an eye on your local government.
Mm-hmm.
Your local government affects you more on a daily basis, constantly, than whoever is sitting in the White House or in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
They absolutely do. They affect your property values. They affect your taxes. They affect everything that you pay bills for, but whether it be it water, sewer, electricity, and they can change your life just by just changing zoning rules. And if you don't keep an eye on that, and people don't, day-to-day citizen does not have time for that. So losing newspapers and losing people with that knowledge of how the system works and keeping an eye on the system, the watchdog that journalists do a day in and day out, is going away. And that's what's the scariest thing to me.
Yeah.
Journalism has changed drastically in the past. In the time that I was there, I was at a newspaper that every Wednesday and Friday when it published, the Friday edition was so thick with ads and everything else that it was, just a plethora of information. And now it's barely 12 pages total when I see it on the newsstand.
Yeah.
With next to no advertising. And it's got ads on the front page everywhere, which makes me die a little inside every time I see it. So
yeah,
they have changed drastically. So if I would say anything, encourage you to support any local journalism that you could.
Yeah.
Because as Robert Duvall, as Bernie White in this movie says, we don't get the money. We never have. We never will. And that is so true. I started out my job making $19,000 a year in 1999, which is that much above the poverty level. I was still living with my folks, and eventually, once the Washington Post came and bought us, everybody's salaries got bumped up to a more livable level. But I did not really make a living where I could settle down and get married until after I was promoted to editor the final time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was, I always said I'm really glad that my wife just likes me as a person, because I would never, whether it was newspapers or whether it was teaching, I was never going to get into a profession where it was about the money. So no, you're not in it for the money. But I love what you said about the local. And that's what I always thought too, that the local, I always had this dream of, well, I want to work for the Tribune. I want to cover Chicago stuff. I want to be in the city of Chicago. Like that's where all the stuff is happening. But I've met plenty of people. There's a guy who works for one of our local papers in the county or the area that we're in, and his daytime job is reporter. His nighttime job is he's a comic book artist and writer. And so sometimes I'll see him. He's at the local comic shop on Free Comic Book Day doing sketches for kids and all kinds of other stuff. But he also, his day job is to cover the news in the area. And like, that's one of the things. That's when Michael Keaton's character, when Henry says this line in the movie, and I'm going to have to heavily edit it. That is one of the lines that I love that he says, because it really gets at the idea of local is always going to be more important. And it's the line where Paul Bladden of the New York Sentinel says, "I hope you're satisfied, a-hole. You just blew your chance to cover the world." And here's where I got to heavily edit it. Really? Well, guess effing what? I don't really effing care. You want to effing know why? Because I don't effing live in the effing world. I live in effing New York City. So go F yourself. And then his secretary, Janet, is like, well, you handled that well. He's like, well, thank you. But I love that part. It's because it gets to the whole day. And I love his line. He's like, I don't live in the world. Like, you lost your chance to cover the world. I don't live in the world. I live in New York City. And sometimes I do think about that with newspapers and journalism. It's like, yes, the local is always going to be more important. Is it important to see the stories that are happening in the big city near you? Sure. Yeah. State level, absolutely yes. National level, sure. But like you said, the stuff that affects you and your life on a day-to-day basis is always going to be the county, the town, the city, the township, the whatever, as far down as you can go on that ladder. That's going to be your day-to-day stuff that is going to affect you as an individual. All that other stuff, important and should be stuff that you should know, but local politicians, local school boards, local, all that stuff is always going to be. So that's why I love that line in the movie, because I feel like that gets at the same idea as, I don't live in the world. I live in New York City. Which is also just kind of a funny line, because I feel like sometimes when people think about New York City, it's like, well, what else is there outside of New York City? That
Right.
is the world, isn't it? So, all right. Well, so for our deep thoughts, and Rob, thank you so much for kind of sharing that about newspapers, because it's something I actually have been thinking about recently too, because I've been a little frustrated with my own job and watching this movie. In fact, my wife made a little comment, and she's like looking at me while we're watching this movie. She's like, "What are you thinking?"
Mhm.
And I was like, "Ugh, I really miss the idea of working for a newspaper." But then I got to tell myself, it's not the same anymore. Like, it's not
It's not even
yeah,
close.
yeah. Like the late '90s idea of working for a newspaper. I'm like, oh no, it's not. Because if I was going into journalism, it was because I probably had a little bit of a Clark Kent complex, and I was there for, truth, justice, and the American way, or and all that stuff. Um, and I feel like, even some people I know, it's few and far between where it's about, your statement of getting it right the first time. I feel like a lot of it now is getting it first, like you were saying. So I think my imagination of the romanticized version of working for a newspaper, if I were to switch jobs at this point, it'd be like, well, I'm going to go back to my first love, and I'm going to go back and work for a newspaper, or work for a news channel, or in some capacity. I don't think it's going to be what I thought it was. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. I think it would be very, very different now. So I think I maybe need to just disabuse myself of that notion.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
you're probably right.
Yeah.
There's
So-
still that idealized view, and not just in your mind. I think it's in a lot of people's minds. The idealized view of the newspaper and from a bygone era, I think it's a nice ideal.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think in a lot of professions, not just the news, but I think you've got the struggle of our two kind of main characters here, of Glenn Close's character, Alicia, who, I would imagine, and I think she probably even states this, or Henry states it at some point, is that when she and Henry got into doing the news, they probably got into it for the exact same reasons and with the exact same motivations. But over time, Alicia, whether it's because she got moved up into these higher positions and she just somehow felt that, well, I got to keep going at all costs. Like, we got to keep this thing going at all costs, and I got to look at the costs. Some of this other stuff we can sacrifice integrity, because we just, what's integrity if there's no newspaper? So I got to keep the newspaper existing. Whereas Henry is just struggling with the idea of, yeah, I got a kid on the way. I need to be making some more money, but at the same time, I can't sacrifice. Like, I will throw a monkey wrench into this whole thing if it means that I have to sacrifice my integrity. I will take off my wooden shoes, which you guys might know, they're called sabots, and throw them into the machine. Hence the word sabotage. But yeah, I love that kind of that dynamic between their two characters, because I think that probably sums up not just journalism and the way journalism has gone probably in the last 30 years or so. But I feel like a lot of professions too. Like I feel like we probably know people within the education system who are sacrificing integrity for any number of reasons. And it's not just, the fields that we work in, but I'm sure within any field. I feel like I've talked to a lot of people recently that have said, well, I've worked in the corporate world, and it used to be in the corporate world that they took care of their workers and they kind of maybe cared about us a little bit. But now it seems like all pretense of caring about workers is gone, and nobody feels that way anymore. And you're completely disposable. So I feel like that's kind of a general sense with a lot of industries right now, no matter who you are or what you're doing, is you've got those competing pieces. It's, you want to uphold your integrity, but at the same time, you got to survive. So, I don't know. I don't even know if I want to ask a question like this. One of my questions was going to be like, well, is one clearly right and one clearly wrong, or are there just kind of shades of gray with everybody? Like which one in this story, like, are there ways that is Glenn Close a bad guy? I guess is maybe a good way of asking this. Is she a bad guy, or is there still something redeeming about her throughout the movie? Just maybe she's a little misguided.
No, she's doing her job. I mean, you cannot. I mean, that's. I have to do some mental gymnastics with this movie, because I know if you only had the information that Michael Keaton gets by peeking at another newspaper, the editor's notes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he goes back and says, that's what we're going to put on the front page. I'm sorry. That is not enough. That is not enough at all. And then, we'll go get a quote from the cop. And then the guy's like, well, you can only have me off the record. Okay. Just police source. Well, that's still not enough. And then, the perp walk photo, I've done those before. There's part of me that's like, if knowing this information, I'm not putting these kids on the front page of the paper.
Yeah.
She was doing her job there. He did not have enough information for them to hold it. And certainly by the time he wants to stop the press, they still don't quite have enough. And, eventually she has the change of heart, but by that point they do have a scintilla more of information. But she was doing her job. You do not go on guts with a story like that. I mean, especially if you're implicating the mob and the police doing a raid that was improper, because that is going to cause a whole another can of worms once it's all done, because you're saying that the police wrongfully arrested 2 juveniles, which will spur investigations all over the place, especially with it being New York, and especially with it being 2 black males, and especially since they had framed it from the beginning as a race issue, as a crime that had racial issues. And you already have people already. You keep hearing dribs and drabs throughout the movie that people in communities are all on edge because they're afraid that there's going to be a race explosion. And you got to remember, this is '94. This isn't too long after the LA riots.
Right.
So, I mean, that was definitely something top of mind to a lot of people, and certainly would have been for the audience, understanding, yeah, this is a big deal. The police got this wrong. So, they try and paint her as the villain of the story, but she's really not. She's actually being responsible. Michael Keaton is just, Hackett is just so convinced because of his experience and what he saw, and on the other editor's desk, which, that being me. And oh, by the way, I can read upside down. I taught myself how to do that because a journalism teacher told me I had to learn how to do that so I could do exactly what he did. But I still would have gone to my editor and said, I saw this on the other guy's desk. And he would have said, well, that's not, just because you saw it on his desk wouldn't be good enough. We've got to get some confirmation on that. So everything that she did in this movie, she is being responsible. Hackett just got lucky that they were able to get a police, a reputable police source to confirm what they were suspecting.
Yeah.
And they, they had to guilt him pretty heavy. I really thought the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, they're not going to get this. Like, they're going to have to. That took some work. They went down there pretty confident, and it wasn't as easy as they thought it was going to be.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of ethical things that Hackett does in this movie, and I'm just like, I would not have done that. I would not have done that. I would not have lied to a police officer about a kid going to college when I don't know anything about this kid, because that's another thing. You don't see them going and trying talking to the kids' families or anything, which would have been a priority with if I was, I would have been like, let's learn about these kids. I mean, are these kids really that bad? And they said that one kid had a felonious assault. That doesn't mean that he gunned down two rich guys, and
right.
Yeah, it's a lot of ethical questions that I would have loved to talk to a whole bunch of other journalists about, like, how many things that, I mean, I'm not saying that there are journalists out there who would not have done exactly what Michael Keaton did, because I've met some and they absolutely would have done exactly what he did. But again, the editor is kind of the gatekeeper on all this. We've got to, because they're the ones who will take the heat for it if something is wrong. They don't, the reporter, when they get that first angry phone call, they're like, hold on, let me let you talk to my editor. I would listen into the newsroom on Wednesday and Friday mornings after we published for that, because like, all right, what did we run? Which reporter are they talking to? Okay. All right. I know which story it is. Okay. Send it on in.
Yep. Yeah. That was, I love the line. And I think it was the scene you were talking about. It's like, what was it? A clipboard and a confident wave can get you in any door.
You would be surprised. There were times when I, just told my reporter, I was like, act like you belong. You don't sneak in. Don't try and get past a security guard or anything, but don't look like you don't belong there. Look like you belong. This is not your first time. And, people will be more willing to talk to you. It is true.
Yeah. That's how I got, and I don't know if I don't know if I had already seen the movie. I had already seen the movie. So maybe that's where I got it from. I walked into, and I got there a little early, and I walked into a campus building where Jay Leno's wife, Mavis Leno, was going to be speaking on something. And I remember I walked in with my, little pad of paper and my recorder. And I just kind of walked kind of right up to where I think her assistant was. And I said, "Hey, I'm from the Daily Illini newspaper, and does Mrs. Leno have a few minutes before the presentation starts?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, absolutely. Come on in, sit down." So I got to sit down just one-on-one and kind of talk with her for a bit. And I noticed kind of behind me the local TV stations, the CBS station, a couple of the had then shown up, and just the daggers they were shooting at me because some college kid was taking up their time that they could talk to her, get their story, and get out so that they could get the whole thing edited together. I remember I was so happy. I was so thrilled. I was like, I am a little person here, but I got here first. So, and it was a clipboard, a smile, and a, "Hey, do you have a few minutes?" And I was in.
Anytime
you got the drop on the big boys.
I did. That was exciting.
Anytime the Washington, D.C. camera crews came down to our little neck of the woods, I told my reporters, and I did it myself, I said, this is your beat. This is your community. You live here. Do not let them try and big time you. And any chance that I had to get right in their way, I did. There was definitely no love lost between me and a lot of DC media people.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you within this movie, do you have a favorite? I'm not going to ask for a favorite scene because that's probably a little unfair. Do you have a favorite character in this movie? Is there one of the reporters or one of the characters in this story that you connect with most?
Robert Duvall, Bernie
Okay.
White.
What is it about Bernie?
That his fatherly, you know, he even talks about, he's like, I'm supposed to be a fatherly figure, and he is kind of the glue that's holding everything together, even though he kind of disappears from the newsroom halfway through the movie and Michael Keaton's kind of taken over everything. You can definitely tell that people, you know, he's respected, but you know, at the same time, you know, he because he had worked so hard and dedicated so much of his life to his job, it had cost him severely. And I was lucky. I was very, very lucky that I was not one of those types of, you know, journalists who was working the crazy long hours. I mean, I did work at long hours when I was younger, but I didn't have a family, didn't have a wife, you know. I actually met my wife through my job. She was a reporter and I was her editor. That's another story. But
is it Marissa Tomei?
Son, if it was Marissa Tomei,
he wouldn't be talking to us, is what he's trying to say.
You know,
I'd have her every episode saying, "Have you seen my wife? Have you met my wife? Have you met my wife?" No, but my wife is stunning and lovely, anyways. But I'm gonna try and save myself.
It's a good move.
But
it's okay. Our wives don't listen to the podcast either.
No, but he does remind
Thank
me
God.
of Bernie. Bernie does remind me of my first editor, who was a grizzled Vietnam vet. He was a medic, a combat medic in Vietnam, and had beaten cancer and had gone to University of Maryland when he was in his early 50s and got his degree in journalism while he was beating cancer and played men's lacrosse. So he was just this gritty, tough as nails guy. And there were times where he was very much the fatherly figure. And then there were times, I mean, I remember vividly, and I tell anybody who would ever ask me about my time with him, he did throw a keyboard at me, and it's because I had turned in a story that was, I'd come back from a trial, and I turned in a story that was very much written, and this person talked, and then this person talked, and then this person talked. And he was on deadline, and he called me into his office and said, "What the am I looking at?" And I said, "I wrote the story." I mean, and he just picked up his keyboard, and had it not had a wire attached to it, it would have hit me in the face. And he just tossed it and said, "I can't edit this." And I don't think he was trying to hit me. I think he was just doing it out of frustration.
Mm-hmm.
And then after he realized what he had done, he calmly says, "Go back to your desk. I'm giving you 15 minutes. Rewrite this story and give me something I can use before I have a giant gaping hole on the front page of my paper." And I said, "Okay." And after I, you know, collected myself, I sat down and I hammered it out. And that was a very quick lesson in turning something around that was usable. And I had literally buried the lead and had to bring the lead up to the top, cut a whole bunch of other crap out that was being repeated. And it was because it was that pressure of being on deadline that I actually produced a great, and he was incredibly complimentary after I turned it in after doing that. So Robert, and in many ways, he resembled Robert Duvall's character. So that's kind of who I gravitate, not because I see me in him, but because it reminds me of somebody who I actually learned a lot from.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't really have, and again, I only ever worked for student newspapers, the high school and the college. So pretty much most of my editors were maybe a couple years older than me. So I never had the experience of somebody who I felt like could really give me some advice on some kind of wizened older editor that had been in the trenches for a while and knew some stuff. And so I've never got that experience, but every time I see a character like that in a movie or a TV show, I always think that's kind of like, that's the stereotypical, like when you see it in a movie or a TV show, it's the grizzled veteran that has the kind of fatherly wisdom but might throw a keyboard or a typewriter at you. So that's awesome. That's awesome. I think the one, I mean, Michael Keaton is the one that I immediately just kind of gravitate towards, because I always feel like even when it's not journalism, when it's having a job as a teacher, I feel like there were plenty of moments of, and I think especially when I moved from being a teacher to working in the technology department, I think there was part of me that was like, well, I really love being a teacher, and that's the reason I got into this, was to teach and to help people. And when I move into this other role, am I still going to be helping anybody, or am I going to be helping anybody in a tangible way that I can see the results of my helping someone? Because as a teacher and as a coach, I felt like I did that. Like I could leave work at the end of the day and be like, I helped this person, I helped these people. And as I was trying to figure out, I was like, well, do I want to take this other job? Because I'm not sure that day in and day out I'm going to see the evidence of me helping anyone. And 5 years later, I can tell you that's absolutely true. Is that I spend a lot of days being like, did I actually accomplish anything today? Did anything get done? Was anyone actually helped? And so I think that's why sometimes I tend to go back to that and be like, would it have been better if I had just sabotaged my chances and stayed where I was, despite the fact I know that I, would not be in the position that I'm in now, would not necessarily have the close to the salary that I might have now and all that. And so I definitely sympathize and kind of, see a little bit of myself in Michael Keaton's shoes in this movie. Because I always kind of feel like that's just his whole situation of, he wants to take care of his family, but this is what he really loves doing, and kind of the struggle between all that. So I also feel like I'm tired a lot, so I did a little bit of Randy Quaid's character, just being able to sleep randomly in the middle of the day.
That sounds awesome.
That sounded awesome. But at the same time, he's probably not sleeping because, and that's why he's got a gun, is because he's afraid someone's going to come after him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the rest of the innocent. It's not a peaceful sleep.
No, and he obviously heard what was on the scanner, so he's
right.
He's still monitoring.
Right. Which I'm going to say, this is probably, and I'd forgotten how much I liked him in this movie. I'm going to say this, except for, and it's a very, very different role, obviously, except for Cousin Eddie, this is probably my favorite Randy Quaid character of any of his. Because this is such a different character than what I'm used to seeing. I mean, I'm used to seeing him as Cousin Eddie. I'm used to seeing him in Independence Day. I'm used to some of that type of character. But he's, even for as much as he's a little goofy in this movie, I really, really enjoy his character. I think it's very, very different from most of the other stuff that I've seen him in.
And he just has that great scene where, in a very simple way, he describes to the Glenn Close character what the problem was, right? When they had the big fist fight and all that, and what she's doing, and now, because I've only seen this once, I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was so well written and it was just so well delivered when he just sums up the entire problem just very simply and makes it all clear for her. I thought that was
Pat, I got it for you right here. It's she says, we're not exactly the Washington. Maybe tell me this is the one you're thinking of. We're not exactly the Washington Post, okay? And then McDougal says, no, we're not. We run stupid headlines because we think they're funny. We run maimings on the front page because we got good art. And I spend 3 weeks complaining about my car because it sells papers. But at least it's the truth. As far as I can remember, and this is one of my favorite lines in the movie, as far as I can remember, we never, ever, ever knowingly got a story wrong until tonight. Is that the one you were thinking of, Pat?
That was it, indeed.
Yeah.
It was just such a great scene.
Yeah. Pat, is there a character that you kind of connect with in this movie? Like if you were going to be one of these characters, is there one that you kind of gravitate towards?
Yeah, I don't know. There's little bits and pieces of each of them, right? Like I can see, okay, I could be like that. Oh, I could be like that guy. Oh, I could be like that guy. But then they all have a have a thing that I'm like, no, but I check up here. Like I wouldn't do this, or I would do something, so it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to select one. But it's interesting of all the different comparisons. You were talking about how the Michael Keaton character is really doing things that just wouldn't be done, right? Like that's not the way you do it, or you'd get flagged, by the editor, and that Glenn Close was doing her job. I'm almost, believe it or not, reminded of the movie Top Gun when they start talking about that and they say, hey, here's the situation. Yeah, Maverick was the hotshot pilot, but no one would want to fly with that in reality because that's not, and then that gets into that discussion, but they said, that's overly dangerous and you wouldn't see that. So actually the Iceman character was right because he was the more consistent. He wasn't the hotshot. He wasn't going off and doing stupid things and all of that. And so I'm almost reminded of that here. You kind of painted out that the Michael Keaton character is like the main character. And that's the one we're rooting for. But in reality, you wouldn't do what he did to the extent that he did it. And that the Glenn Close character is actually the one that I thought that was an interesting perspective. And it made me think of that movie as a comparison. As far as what character, man, I'll have to keep thinking because I don't know that I can pick one. I see elements of me or things that relate to me in each character, but I don't know if one sums it up.
I will say too, the other way I know that I connect with Michael Keaton is I feel like there were plenty of days when I worked at the same building that you work at, Pat, that I was constantly, if I had run out, I was constantly searching other people's classrooms and be like, hey, I desperately need a Coke. Do you guys have quarters? Anybody got any quarters? I need to go grab a Coke or else I'm going to have to hurt somebody. So that was another kind of funny part of the movie that I'm like, oh yeah, different situation, teacher, not journalist, but I remember needing a little energy boost and trying to scrounge quarters up from people because, oh man, the Coke machine is out. And there were a few times where if I was completely desperate for some caffeine and I'm not a coffee drinker, that if the Coke machine was out in our building, I would actually go walk to another building.
Right.
Right. I have 20 minutes. I have 20 minutes before my next class. I think my key card can get me into the elementary school. I know they've got Cokes because those people drink water. One thing I did want to mention before, because we want to jump into our three questions here in just a bit, was how similar. There were a lot of things about this one that really, and I don't know exactly why, it really made me think of the movie Parenthood. And Parenthood, maybe it's some of the like family conversations and the family dynamics and it made me think of, there were parts about this where Robert Duvall's character is talking about being a father and that father figure kind of thing, and it reminded me of in Parenthood. There's the part where Keanu Reeves is talking about, you got to buy a license to drive, you got to buy a license to go fish, you got to but they'll just let anybody, I think he's like something like, they'll just let any a-hole be a parent. And it felt like, and knowing that those are both Ron Howard movies, there was something about this movie that really kind of, I don't know, for some reason I kept thinking there's just little bits and pieces here that are reminding me so much of Parenthood. And I don't know that I can say exactly what it was. Maybe it was the conversation of fatherhood and things like that. But yeah, there was just, I don't know, for some reason it felt like this was in the same universe as the movie Parenthood. The Ron Howard cinematic universe, maybe we can call it. I don't know. Did any of you guys catch that at all? Any connections to Parenthood or any of the other Ron Howard movies?
I don't know that I personally have seen enough of his movies that are in this kind of genre, or you know what I'm saying, that I could be able to do that. But now I'm trying to remember the last time I saw Parenthood. It's been a while. So I'm curious now. I might go watch that next just to see if there's any of the relations that you talk about. And it's funny because I don't know if it's a dialogue thing or not, but with Aaron Sorkin, there's YouTube edits of this, but they call it the Sorkinisms or whatever you call it, whatever you call it, whatever they call it. But it's sort of like how many times he'll like use a line that's the same, but just in different situations, and just how things relate. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's why it feels like an Aaron Sorkin script, because he's using these lines that he's used in other places, and it just, like a film composer using a familiar set of chord progressions or for a familiar melody fragment or something like that. It'd be interesting to go down and really pick out they're using the same dialogue, or they're using similar speech patterns or something like that. So long rambling answer to say I didn't pick up on it because I haven't seen Parenthood in a long time, but I would really like to go back and study it, because it's cool to me when you can find those common threads.
Yeah. All right. We got some 3 questions coming up. Is there anything else we want to say about the paper before we move into 3 questions? Or we can put the paper to bed, let the presses roll.
We can put it to bed.
All right. All right. Time for 3 questions.
He asks each traveler 5 questions. 3 questions. 3 questions.
It's impossible to answer.
Impossible because you don't know the answer.
Nobody could answer that question.
I want to ask you a bunch of questions. I want to have them answered immediately.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
All right, our 3 questions this time around from the paper. Question number 1, who is your favorite fictional reporter or journalist?
Fictional April O'Neil.
Oh, there we go. My dad would have shared the same sentiment with you.
She was, of all the cartoon characters that I grew up with, she was one who actually did her job.
That actually did reporting, right?
Yes.
That was like my first, my knee-jerk response, just because I'm a Superman fan, is I'm like, well, I mean, come on, Clark Kent. But I'm like, actually, in most iterations of Superman, you don't ever see Clark Kent do any kind of reporting. Like, he's not, it's Lois Lane does reporting, and depending on which iteration of Lois Lane, she's a better reporter than others. But I'm like, you very rarely actually see Clark Kent do reporting. So I always thought, especially in the comics, when they had the stories where it was, Clark was boots on the ground reporting, I was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. Like, that's what his character is supposed to be. So because of that, I did not choose Clark Kent as my fictional reporter. I really enjoyed the TV show The Newsroom. So I think I got to go Will McAvoy as my favorite fictional reporter. Although there are a couple of the other supporting characters in there that are equally awesome. But my wife, Pat, you talk about the Aaron Sorkin stuff. My wife was initially going to go into politics. And so she absolutely loves The West Wing. Like, that was when we watched that show, that was her. I was call things like, that's my Dead Poet Society. That was like her Dead Poet Society was The West Wing. She absolutely loved that show because it was all the same stuff, like the inspirational stuff, the romanticized version of politics. And then when The Newsroom came out, I'm like, oh, this is my West Wing. I love it. This is good stuff. So I'm fictional journalist. I got to go with Will McAvoy on that one. So, Pat, what about you? Who's your favorite fictional reporter or journalist?
This one's hard, and I'm struggling with this one. So I was looking through lists, I was going through everything, and I got an answer, but then I'm going to think of like 10 more once we're done recording. But I guess my favorite journalist is, and now I'm totally drawing a blank on his name. Who was from The West Wing that was kind of CJ's, like, sometime on again, off again, like, love interest?
Yeah.
Why am I drawing?
It was.
Oh my gosh.
Well, wasn't he the same guy from 30 something?
Yes. Yes.
What was his name? Danny Concannon was the actor.
No, wait.
Or no, that was his
Was-
name. Danny Concannon.
That was his name. Yeah,
What was
Danny Concannon. Yeah. I would.
What was the actor's name? Timothy Busfield. There we go.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay, that was a heck of a brain freeze on my part. I apologize,
That's
everybody. No, I would say he was my favorite. I thought just the way he was used, the way he, you know, he and CJ had that relationship that, like, you know, they were worried about crossing lines and keeping it professional and so on. I thought they used him in comedic ways very, very well. But then I also thought he articulated, because I don't know that in the West Wing, they made like the journalists the enemy, but you know, there was very much a whole, well, how do we control the press and how do we do that? And I always thought he articulated, at least in my mind, saying this humbly as we have journalists on the pod right now, but I always thought he articulated the need for what he did. I thought he did that so well. And I just, I really enjoyed that character and the, you know, what he brought to the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was shocked that nobody went with Kent Brockman, but that's okay. That's okay. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Democracy simply doesn't work. All right. Question number 2. Favorite real life reporter or journalist?
Hunter Thompson.
Nice one.
And not so much for the way he went and did things, but his writing is outstanding to read. His books are fascinating. You know, it's not journalism in the traditional sense, but he wrote about, I mean, his book on the Hells Angels is, just start there with anything you want to read by him, and it's an eye-opening look at a certain point in history. All of his books, The Great Shark Hunt, they're all very much a snapshot of time and place that he was very much involved in. Not the way a journalist should be in many cases, but an outstanding writer, outstanding journalist. Just not in any traditional sense. I don't think anybody would do themselves or their career any good trying to emulate him.
Yeah.
Hunter S. Thompson did the well, he did a lot, but he did the what was it, the Voyage of the Sausage Creature? He rode a Ducati motorcycle, and as a fan of Ducati motorcycles, I was biased to it, but he did a whole write-up about riding a Ducati motorcycle, and I want to see it was the Voyage of the Sausage Creature, or something like that.
Song of the Sausage Creature.
Song of the Sausage
yeah,
Creature.
yeah, that one. Like I said, I'm biased because I'm a fan of Ducati motorcycles, so I always thought that one was pretty cool.
Found a quick quote from that one. It is that simple. If you ride fast and crash, you're a bad rider. And if you're a bad rider, you should not ride motorcycles.
That's that, right? There are some things nobody needs in this world. And a bright red hunchback warp speed 900cc cafe racer is one of them. But I want one anyway. And on some days, I actually believe I need one. That is why they are dangerous. Amen, brother.
Yeah. Bo, what about you? This is our favorite real life journalist. And I know you got cut off a little bit, so if you got a fictional one, you can throw that one in too.
No, gosh. Real life journalist, a tough one for me. Because I hate to say it, I don't pay that much attention to the bylines. I just sort of read the stories. Like, it's just one of those things. Did columnists count?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I guess if columnists count, I might say Paul Sullivan.
Okay.
I've read a lot of his stuff over the years. There's a guy whose books I've read a lot of, whose name I'm going to forget right now. He was a sports columnist in Chicago. Let's see if I can get it really quick. What's some really great, oddly golf books, but can't remember his freaking name now. And of course, I had the name a couple hours ago, and now it is gone.
Mm-hmm.
This is gonna bug me. Hopefully, it'll come to me in the next couple of minutes.
Oh, that's all right.
But Paul Sullivan, maybe Tellender
Okay.
too.
Okay. Mine was my dad always liked for more modern journalists. My dad always liked John Cass from the Tribune,
Oh
and
yeah, good
I
one.
I mean, yeah, he's a great writer. I didn't always agree politically with most of what he wrote. But then again, when my dad was alive, he and I would probably not have agreed politically on everything either, but that's okay. But I think one of the reasons that my dad always enjoyed that was because he also, when my dad used to work downtown, whenever he got a chance to, he'd swing over and have lunch at the Billy Goat Tavern, and that's where I think in the mornings or at lunchtime, that's where John Cass would sit and try to come up with some ideas for his column. And
Yep.
so I know a few times, I think my dad even got to talk to him real quick and be like, "Hey, I loved your column last week on such and such." So I think that was kind of always a fun bit because when my dad did work downtown, it was not that far from the Tribune building, and obviously not that far from Billy Goat Tavern. So he got to see a few of the writers and the columnists down there from time to time. I know John Cass was one of his favorites. Um, I think probably, and it was around the time that I was on the newspaper in high school, that my dad had bought for me a copy of. Let me see if I remember I remember the name of the book. It was One More Time, and it was the best of Mike Royko. And I remember like, okay, this is he's definitely got some funny stuff going on here. So it kind of was like, well, that's not just like the straight up news reporting that I've been doing working for. Like I thought that was news reporting was just straight up. You tell the story. You don't necessarily insert your voice into some of it. And I never really got into any of the. I was never a columnist. I always thought, well, that could be a fun, you know, fun thing to try at some point too. And I think I would have had, with my sense of humor, I think I could have made a decent stab at it. But I think Mike Royko, some of his stuff, I especially as a kid, I thought some of his stuff was kind of clever and funny. And especially when he'd come up with the different characters, like his what was it? Slats Grobnik was his Polish Chicago character that he would write from the perspective of sometimes. So yeah, I remember reading that book, and it had a bunch of his, different columns that he had written, and I kind of always appreciated his style of writing. All right, question number 3, final question here. If you worked for a newspaper, what would your beat be? Like, what section would you want to write for? And also for me, having the experience of just the school newspapers, I loved writing everything, any chance I got. But I really liked writing for the sports section when I was on the high school paper. Did a bunch of other stuff too, but really enjoyed the sports section. In college, it was mostly the kind of campus town beat, but every once in a while I would, cover a few other things here and there. The one that I never got to do that I would have loved to have done, and I would have loved to have done it in high school, but I feel like we had somebody on the high school paper that just monopolized that and would not let anybody else have it, was I would love to have written for the film section, like the film and entertainment section. But I don't remember who it was.
You work on the paper? Well, no, because you did it senior year and he had graduated already. Never mind.
Yeah. I did. I mean, I covered a few film things on there. I think I covered when The Matrix came out. I think I wrote about that. Obviously, when episode 1 came out, I wrote about that one because there were a couple of big stories in there. The other thing I would have loved to have done, because I did it just in my own free time, was to create my own version of The Onion. because that was I always had
There you
such
go.
a great time. And I don't know if you remember that, Bo. I did actually hijack the layout files that we had in Quark Express, and I did create my own fake
I
version of
actually
the Drops of Ink
I
newspaper. Yeah.
I do remember that.
I actually still have them in a file folder somewhere. I'll pull them out from time to time, look at them, and go, wow, I can't believe I didn't get in more trouble for writing that. Some stuff would not fly today, but, it was 17-year-old me thought it was really funny at the time.
I remember being amused.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a couple of our reporters found out where the layout templates were and made a couple of their own versions of our newspaper, savaging myself, another editor, each other. I mean, they had a lot of fun with it, and I'm glad those never saw the light of day because we all would be canceled. I guarantee it.
Yeah, I think when they did finally allow me to print, because I kept doing it for a while. Like I would finish my stories I was supposed to write, and then I would do that just off to the side. And then I would just kind of start to circulate it among the other people at the newspaper. And then eventually our teacher, who was the advisor for the newspaper, kind of found out, and she's like, okay, these are funny. We cannot ever print them. But maybe during the April issue, if you want to throw in like an April Fool's thing, we could do like a little centerfold. And I'll give you 2 pages in the center of the newspaper. You can have 2 full pages right in the middle if you want to tack some stories in there, but they've got to be school appropriate. I'm like, oh, well, where's the fun in that? Come on.
I was going to say, you just ruined the whole thing.
We were told flat out at the beginning we would not do any fake ones because apparently some groups in a previous high school journalism class decided to do that. And though they didn't take it far, in my opinion, they took it far enough that some teachers or the principal was rather miffed and threatened to pull the funding for the entire school newspaper if that ever happened again. So we weren't even going to try.
That's a little drastic.
I feel like this is a fine tradition. I feel like this is a fine tradition of student newspapers because my dad was the editor-in-chief of his student newspaper in the really tiny farm town that they lived in. And I remember him telling stories of like, yeah, we got kind of in big trouble and they threatened to just cancel the newspaper for the high school completely and never have it ever again.
Wow.
And they would have been well within their rights, as I learned in my college media law class. That, oh, you think you're protected? Not in high school, you're not.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that's the age in high school when you're just like, yeah, freedom of the press, and we're going to go out there, and I'm getting out over my skis because you guys actually have done it. But I could just see that's the age where kids are really like, yeah, we can do this. We're going to push the bounds, and we might get in trouble, but we're going to do it anyway, and just being shut down. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I could just see that being the age that would happen.
Right.
Maybe
my dad probably could have gotten away with it. It was a tiny farm town in Southwest Missouri. I guarantee when he tried to print those limericks, none of those kids had ever been to Nantucket, so they didn't even know where it was.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know where it is, then it's not offensive. So, where would you guys work? What beat would you work on? Or Rob, did you have a favorite beat, or did you have one that you never got to do that you wish you had done?
No, I got to do every single beat, and okay. I would tell you, I absolutely despise planning and zoning, but there were other reporters who ate that up, and I was just like, what is wrong with you? How many times were you dropped as a child? But I will never forget the episode of What We Do in Shadows where the energy vampire decides to go to a county commissioner's meeting and is just sitting there the whole time, just feeding. And I was like, yes, that is exactly what it is like. You can just go in there and it's just people just arguing about stuff that just goes right over your head, but you just feel that it's so important to them. And it's important to a lot of people. I get it, but I started out on Cops and Courts, and that was the most eye-opening because it was covering crime in my own community and occasionally there would be names of people that I knew in high school that would come across the blotter, and I'd be like, well, that's unfortunate that that's where they have wound up.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed covering education. Like I said, the politics involved when I was covering the Board of Education in Prince George's County was absolutely crazy. When I was an editor at our Calvert County newspaper, the reporter did such an incredible job. She kept digging and digging and digging and got a hold of the superintendent's contract after he left the county and dug into it and realized that the county commissioners, the school board, and the superintendent had negotiated a contract where he was going to get paid in perpetuity after he left the school system, went to the richest school system in the state. And not only was he going to be paid an astronomical amount of money, but his wife was going to be paid all of their medical insurance, life insurance, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that the county was on the hook for, even though he no longer worked here.
Wow, that takes some.
We won a few awards for that one.
I believe the word is chutzpah.
Yeah. I mean, and I remember arguing with one of the Board of Education members. He was like, well, doesn't so-and-so deserve it? Hasn't he been great? I was like, it's not up to me to decide.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to go and explain to the taxpayers why you think he deserves this, because you didn't tell them that his contract was basically giving him bonuses upwards of millions of dollars. So I do think the Cops and Courts beat ultimately was the more crazy, and I got to sit in on trials. But sometimes the local politics, the school boards, the county commissioners, some of that stuff could get really, really crazy as well. But planning and zoning, you'll never catch me in planning and I could hear that they're planning to bulldoze my entire neighborhood. I would not show up to the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I think those are the people that also celebrate National Spreadsheet Day on October 17th. Yeah.
Okay, but you knew when the day was. So what does that say?
Because I work with people that love spreadsheets. And I'm a kind person, and I like to get to know my coworkers, so I celebrate stupid holidays that they might enjoy.
Yeah, I know.
Mm-hmm. Let's just say I actually was a little bit of a backhanded thing too, because I was trying to celebrate a kind of obscure holiday for them, because let's just say they all forgot that it was Boss's Day not that long ago. And I'm their boss, so I was trying to make some kind of like a good-natured, oh, hey, let me celebrate you guys since you didn't celebrate me. Not that I care. I don't really care, but what about you? If you worked for a newspaper, what section would you work for?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, probably sports. It's certainly the thing I would rather talk about and look at than anything else.
I will say, when I got to spend time with Dee and Jason in person, we had a conversation, and I wasn't surprised, but those are our good friends from the Surely Can't Be Serious podcast. They made a comment that we were talking about food, and they made a comment, and we were with a group of people, and all of a sudden Dee goes, you know what I could just listen to for hours is I could listen to the 30-something movie podcast guys talk about food and talk about their favorite places to eat in Chicago. I could just listen to that as its own standalone podcast. You guys could just talk about food for an hour. And he's like, I would be subscribed to every episode of your podcast.
And did you tell him, don't tell us that, because we might.
Because we will. Like, we can very easily devolve into the 30-something food podcast. So I feel like, in a sense, we're all maybe wired in a way that we could also write for the food section of the newspaper as well.
Yeah, I think we're all afraid to do it, though, for all of the reasons.
We might love it too much. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Patrick, which section of the newspaper would you write for?
Well, probably like sports, but specifically like motorsports. I think I'd
There you
like it.
go.
That'd be fun. I say this because, I'm a horrendous writer and so I would totally be great at writing for a newspaper, but sarcasm. But yeah, I'd say if anything, it would be that, I don't know. Well, Formula One is getting more and more popular in the US, and MotoGP might be right behind. But like I think that would be a lot of fun.
That's okay, Pat. Nobody needs to know how to write anymore. There's ChatGPT.
Yeah, I don't even know how to use ChatGPT. And then I get ticked because it doesn't sound like me. And I don't think it would ever sound like me because my writing is so horrendous that if you get something from me that's well written, you'll know it's ChatGPT. I mean, let's just put it that way. Right?
Pat, you can probably tell anything written by ChatGPT because it's still pretty awful.
Well, okay, if you say so.
I'm just saying you would be a better writer than ChatGPT. So.
Oh, John, careful.
Don't sell yourself.
Careful.
Don't sell yourself short, Pat. All right,
Well,
that's going to do it for the 30-something movie podcast this time around on our episode on The Paper. Absolutely love this movie. If you haven't seen this movie before, I mean, we have spoiled the entire thing, but if you haven't seen it, we highly recommend that you forget everything you just heard from this episode. Go watch it and then come back here and listen to it again so you can remember all the stuff. Treat it like Memento, like you don't have a memory and you got to come back and listen to this several more times. But go back and watch the movie if you haven't seen it. Or even if you have seen it, go back and watch it again because it's awesome. We have got, for the rest of this month, we've only got 1 week left this month, but we're finishing it off the work-life balance month with It Could Happen to You. So far this month, we've had Clerks, Renaissance Man, this episode on The Paper, and then our Patreon episodes were The River and The Ref from 84 and 94, respectively, or respectfully. We could be very respectful about those two movies. And then we're going to finish off the year of 1994 with December, and that is Won't Someone Think of the Children month. Our Patreon episode for that one is The War from 1994. Our Patreon short is Clifford from 1994. And our regular episodes for the month of December are Junior, Leon, The Professional, The Client, and The Next Karate Kid. So won't somebody think of the children? As always, Rob, thank you so much for being here. We've gotten a lot of Rob towards the end of the year here, and it's been really fun to have you here.
Well, I hope I'm not overstaying my welcome.
Oh, no.
Absolutely
not.
And this is an episode I really just enjoyed hearing you guys talk, both of you guys, all three of you guys, but John and Rob going, talking about how, newspapers have changed and all that. Like, I just found that super informative. So thank you so very much for coming by and sharing your thoughts on this awesome movie.
Should I ever make it out to Chicago, I would love to take you guys out to a restaurant and just hold court and just share all the war stories, because I have some that are hysterical. I have some that'll curl your hair, and then I have some will just make you like, wait, that really happened. But they're all true. And again, like I said, as bitter as I am that I'm no longer doing it in the capacity that I once, truly, truly loved, I did, meet my lovely wife. And, I don't regret a lot of what happened in my career, because it was something that made me appreciate the community that I lived in a lot more and understand the community a lot more. And again, I'll just implore anybody listening, if you have a local newspaper, even if you don't think it's all that great, it's not the Chicago Tribune, it's not the Washington Post, it's not the Wall Street Journal, support them. If it's, most places now have gone completely digital, and digital subscriptions are next to nothing compared to what not knowing what is going on in your own backyard could cost you. Mm-hmm. So just consider that. And again, gentlemen, thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Always love having you on with us, Rob. All right,
you, Rob.
Everybody, be excellent to each other. Go watch some good movies and go get a newspaper subscription to your local newspaper. Go do it right now. And we will see you back here next time.
Bring the lights down low, it's time to show. Lights, camera, you know what we mean. Behold the magic of the silver screen. Some movies rock